Tonight, the next abortion battle after Democrats' attempt to codify Roe into law fails in the Senate.
The motion is not agreed to.
Plus, Finland's last straw.
President Putin thought he could cause division, but he has achieved the opposite. We stand here today, more united than ever.
Russia's historically neutral neighbor racing to find safe haven in the arms of NATO. And following the money, the Palestinian Authority may be using U.S. dollars to fund terror.
Rewarding terrorism does not promote peace.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Another setback for Democrats and the pro-choice movement. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And good evening, I'm Jenna Browder. Democrats already setting up the next showdown over abortion after last night's failed attempt to codify Roe v. Wade into law.
The party is still licking its wounds after the defection of one Democrat who joined all 50 Republicans to vote against the sure-to-fail bill. The point, according to Democratic Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, to get every senator on record after that leaked Supreme Court draft opinion signaling the demise of Roe, the case that legalized abortion nationwide.
With the Supreme Court set to release its final decision on a Mississippi court case that brought all of this about, Democrats are trying to make abortion a central issue heading into November's midterms.
Elect more pro-choice Democrats if you want to see a woman have control over her own body. Elect more pro-choice Democrats if you want to protect a woman's freedom and right to choose. Elect more MAGA Republicans if you want to see a nationwide ban on abortion, if you want to see doctors and women arrested, if you want to see no exceptions for rape or incest.
Here with us now is CBN News chief political analyst David Brody. David, Republicans are painting the Democrat stance on abortion as too radical, even for Democrat Joe Manchin. Meanwhile, Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has suggested the possibility of a national abortion ban if the Supreme Court does overturn Roe v. Wade vis-a-vis the Dobbs case. David, we've seen polling on how voters feel about abolishing abortion wholesale, but where are voters in the middle left in the extreme ends of this debate?
Well, it's a good question, John. And let me just clear up something about Chuck Schumer that we did not hear from. Republicans are glad you never ran that soundbite because they believe we've heard from Chuck Schumer quite often during this, and they're not happy with what they hear. Look, here's the truth of the matter. The Republicans kind of, how do I say this nicely, stepped in it when McConnell went there on this idea of a national abortion ban. Like, can we slow down for a moment? Number one, Roe v. Wade not overturned officially yet. But beyond that, why would you even go there and give the Democrats, once again, another kind of handmaid's tale, if you will, talking point that Republicans are just like the boogeyman with coat hangers? So that, I think, is the problem for Republicans here, because the way you phrased that question, and it was a good question, don't get me wrong. I want to compliment you, John, on your question asking, if you will. But now we have like one extreme, and now the Republicans have done the other side, the other extreme. And so this is the problem. When you have two extremes like this, that's good for the Democrats, because the Republicans really just want to talk about the Democrats' extreme. But now the Democrats can talk about the Republican extreme, and that's the problem. In terms of the middle, yeah, it's much more complicated than just both extremes, for sure.
Right, both sides cutting out so much of the nuance here. David, another issue, the January 6th House Select Committee has issued subpoenas for Republican leader Kevin McCarthy and 4 other GOP lawmakers. Unprecedented, of course. David, what does this subpoena signal about where the investigation is headed?
Well, this is interesting, Jenna. There are a couple things to think about here. First of all, you're right. It's unprecedented. This is something that is kind of, how do I say this, kind of big news. But here's the problem. In the climate that we live in and the politics that we are dealing with today, it kind of doesn't feel as big as it could have been back, I don't know, 50, 60 years ago or so, even 40, 30 years ago, because everything's just so polarized. And I think what you're seeing from the Democrats here is to try and get as much as they can out of this committee because, oh, that's right, the red wave that we're hearing so much about in November is about to be an onslaught for Democrats. And so they want to get a lot of this out of the way because that committee, in essence, will evaporate come the time that the Republicans would take over. So they're trying to get everything they possibly can done. So this does feel, obviously, it's political. It's been political from the get-go, and this just seems more of it.
And you're hearing a lot about the possibility of a tit-for-tat if Republicans do have that red wave and they're in power, also subpoenaing Democrats. David, one issue and a little bit of a hard turn affecting families is the national shortage of baby formula. The president reportedly having calls with formula manufacturers, but this has been a known problem as far back as this time last year, made worse by several FDA recalls of baby formula. David, could the administration have done more to avoid this crisis?
Well, you know, it's hard to say. I mean, look, this is a supply chain crisis. And of course, a lot of folks will blame the Biden administration for that. I think it goes back a little further than that, clearly, with COVID. So I think the jury's still out on that. I'll just say this. It's a PR nightmare for the Biden administration. I mean, it's one thing, as I've lamented many times, to not be able to find cream cheese in a grocery store. Try not, and then now you can't find baby formula. And oh, by the way, let me just point out this PR problem. You've got issues as it relates to what's happening at the border. You know, you now have Florida congressmen showing video of illegal immigrants, the border facilities down there actually getting pallets of baby formula before grocery stores all across America are getting them. That is not good for the Biden administration. So any way you want to slice it, the Biden administration's got some problems on their hands. And look, they say they're on top of it, but you know what? Guess what? The government's on top of it. Good luck with that.
All right. David, we have to leave it there. Thank you, David. Nice to see you.
Thanks, David.
You bet. Good to see you.
NATO expansion. Vladimir Putin's war on Ukraine is backfiring. The invasion was intended to keep NATO from increasing its ranks along Russia's border. But as the Kremlin keeps up the bloody campaign, it's having the opposite effect. Today, Finland announced it wants to join the Western military alliance. Finland's president delivering a blunt message for Putin.
When you ask how they see possible Finnish joining, well, my response would be that you caused this. Look at the mirror.
It is a dramatic shift and a major blow to the Kremlin, which used NATO expansion as a pretext for the war. Neighboring Sweden is also expected to make a similar decision with an announcement set for Sunday. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is warning Putin any attack on NATO allies would be a game changer. Moscow responding, saying Finland's request to join amounts to a clear threat. The fear now, though, is that Russia will double down in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukrainian troops are making some gains on the battlefield, recapturing several towns and villages near the Russian border. Well, as Finland breaks with a long-standing policy of neutrality and applies to join NATO, our team is on the ground there. George Thomas reports from Helsinki.
Here on the streets of Finland's capital, Helsinki, CBN News found overwhelming support for joining NATO.
If you look at the Russian behavior, I think there are quite few options for us.
Sharing an 830-mile border with Russia, Finland is historically neutral. Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, however, has so alarmed this Nordic country that it's now racing to find safe haven in the arms of NATO.
I think we should have done it already like 2 decades ago, but it's about time to do it.
Finns understand what Ukrainians are going through today because they have to only look at their own history and their experience with the Russians. November 1939, the Russians decide to invade this tiny nation under the pretext that it was saving Finland from the Nazis. Decades later, Finns see Russia as a clear and present danger.
We have fought against Russia 2 times in 1933 and 1945. So we have to get some allies.
Neighboring Sweden, another Nordic country, is expected to also join NATO within days.
President Putin thought he could cause division, but he has achieved the opposite. We stand here today, more united than ever, and with the ambition of strengthening our bonds even more.
Moscow has warned both countries against joining, vowing a military response. Hannu Haukka, who leads Finland's biggest Christian television network, says his country has been preparing for the possibility of a Russian attack for years, purchasing a wide range of military assets. Meanwhile, troops from the US, UK, Latvia and Estonia recently took part in military exercises in Western Finland.
We have already reacted to a potential scenario where Russia would even try or even think of trying to invade Finland.
On Wednesday, Britain's Prime Minister joined the US and Germany, vowing to defend both Nordic countries if they came under attack.
From the high north to the Baltics and beyond, our armed forces will train, operate and exercise together, marrying our defence and security capabilities and formalising a pledge that we will always come to one another's aid.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine has clearly led to unintended consequences. Despite Putin's demands that NATO pull back its forces from Eastern Europe, the alliance now looks set to welcome new members, much to the Kremlin's dismay. George Thomas, CBN News, Helsinki, Finland.
Coming up, lessons learned from the pandemic as global leaders prepare to tackle the next big threat. Welcome back. Well, the pandemic is far from over. The stark reality drawing more than a dozen nations together to work to put an end to it while preparing for the next pandemic.
The White House hosted the second virtual COVID-19 summit, searching for ways to vaccinate the world and adopt new strategies against future threats. CBN's Brody Carter has the latest on the fight against COVID-19.
Thursday's summit was mainly a philanthropy event to raise money in the fight against COVID-19. $6 billion is the goal. The White House also renewed calls for mass vaccinations and plans to fight the next pandemic.
It's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
The global summit comes as the U.S. crosses a grim milestone, 1 million deaths due to COVID-19. President Biden ordered federal flags at half-staff to honor the dead.
My heart goes out to all of those who are struggling, asking themselves, how do I go on without him? How do I go on without her?
Another focus is to make vaccines, tests, and treatments available for all nations. Here at home, Dr. Anthony Fauci says future vaccines are inevitable.
I think sometime in the middle of the summer, we're going to know what the cadence is going to be about how often we're going to have to vaccinate people.
COVID's on the rise again. New numbers from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services show cases have more than doubled in the last month, increasing in at least 34 states and U.S. territories. In the coming weeks, the CDC expects New York, Florida, and California to see a surge in COVID deaths.
This pandemic isn't over. We have to double down on our efforts to get shots in people's arms.
The Shots in Arm campaign comes as countries lag in vaccinations and push to put the pandemic behind them. Doctors say we have to prepare for the next wave as we learn to live with COVID.
The average person is getting, milder and milder disease when they get infected. We're still seeing a lot of people in the hospital, a lot of people dying, and we're still at risk of another major wave coming at some point in the future.
The U.S. has shipped about half of its pledged 1 billion vaccines to more than 100 countries. Still, less than 16% of people in poor countries have been vaccinated. The fight against COVID-19 continues. Brody Carter, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Brody. In economic news, unemployment is slightly up here at home. New figures from the Labor Department showed 203,000 people applied for jobless benefits last week. That is a slight uptick from the week before. Historically, unemployment is still at a record low, though, approaching 1968 levels and just below pre-pandemic averages. With job openings at record highs and workers quitting at record levels, employers are struggling to hire and retain workers. The good news for workers, this of course means job security and few layoffs. And with that, we're joined by Ted Rossman, Senior Industry Analyst at Bankrate. Ted, welcome. Good to have you on with us this evening. So you heard the report there. Unemployment remains historically low. At the same time, people are quitting at a record level, job openings widely available. It doesn't seem to all add up. Make sense of this for us.
Yeah, there are some sort of weird oddities in the economy right now. I really think the job market is the biggest strength that we have right now. I don't think there's too much to worry about there. Now, in terms of other worries, yeah, we've got inflation, we've got rising interest rates, COVID, war. I mean, yeah, there's other stuff to worry about. I really think the strong job market is helping us weather some of these other challenges, though. For instance, I was struck earlier this week that total credit card debt actually fell in the first quarter. I was not anticipating that, especially with inflation running so hot.
That is very interesting. You know, talking about a strong job market. What does that mean, though, for employers, Ted? With so many job openings, hiring and keeping workers is proving to be a challenge for so many.
That's right. It's something that Fed Chairman Jerome Powell's been talking a lot about, this fact that now, according to the Department of Labor, there are about 2 job openings for every 1 person looking for work. So that's definitely still an employees market. And I think we're also seeing it with trends like return to office. A lot of people are really demanding flexibility and have a lot of bargaining power with their employers right now. So I think if you're a company, 1, you want to hold on to the people you have, because 2, it's really hard to find new workers these days.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned the Fed Chair Jerome Powell. The Fed continues to raise interest rates in an attempt to curb inflation. Ted, could that lead to an economic slowdown on a broader scale where we do start to see some job losses?
It's a legitimate worry. Chairman Powell himself even admitted that it's going to be difficult to engineer this so-called soft landing. Basically, what the Fed's trying to do is to slow demand and slow the economy to some extent to get rid of this persistent inflation problem, but not so much that it triggers a recession and lots of people lose their jobs. We're starting from a real position of strength here in the employment market, so that's a good thing. It's kind of cold comfort for workers, though, because, yeah, your wages are up 5.5% on average, but if inflation's up about 8.5%, which is also true, it just doesn't feel good.
Yeah, your money certainly goes a lot less farther than it used to. Ted Rossman with Bankrate, thank you so much. Great insights.
Thanks, Ted. Coming up, could some of the hundreds of millions of dollars in aid to the Palestinian Authority be used to fund terror? When Faith Nation returns, one group tracks the money trail.
Well, every year, the Palestinian Authority receives hundreds of millions of dollars from America, Israel, and the European Union. But for the past 4 years, no one knows exactly how that money's being spent.
Palestinian leaders will not release the information. As Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem, it may be because millions of dollars likely is being used to fund terrorism.
Over the last few years, the Palestinian Authority has changed its financial reporting, and a leading watchdog group wants to know what it's trying to hide.
It used to publish, albeit limited, financial reportings on a monthly basis and an annual basis, but slowly but surely they've been cutting back the amount of publications that they put out.
After researching the issue, Maurice Hirsch of the Palestinian Media Watch found the PA hasn't published its annual budget in 4 years.
That means that no one really knows how the Palestinian Authority plans to use their money that they have coming in every year, international donor money, Israeli money that's coming in as a result of the Oslo Accords, and even their own money. Almost every country in the world publishes a budget. The Palestinian Authority, which is so dependent on international aid, doesn't publish its budget.
Hirsch says even published accounting information of what had been spent is now missing.
When you go onto the website of the Palestinian Ministry of Finance, there is no access to any financial details whatsoever.
CBN News repeatedly attempted to contact the Palestinian Authority, but was unable to get a response. Since its beginning in 1994, the international community has basically funded the Palestinian Authority. More than half of that money comes from Israel, mostly taxes collected from Palestinians working in the country. While the PA collects domestic taxes, the rest of its funding comes from the European Union and the United States.
The reason really that they're trying to hide their finances is that Palestinian Media Watch has repeatedly used the reports that they do publish in order to highlight the fact that they pay hundreds of millions of dollars in rewards to terrorists every single year.
That's why Congress passed the Taylor Force Act in 2018. Taylor Force was a U.S. military veteran murdered in a terror attack in Israel. His murderer was killed in the attack, and so his family receives a stipend because he was a terrorist. The Taylor Force Act doesn't allow the U.S. to give direct economic aid to the PA unless it stops paying stipends to terrorists and the families of dead terrorists.
There's just the aid which is going indirectly via U.S. aid for the benefit of the Palestinians.
USAID and the United Nations Relief Works Agency funding goes to infrastructure projects, to schools and health clinics for the people. But that frees up other monies in the PA budget that could be used to pay terrorists.
What we've also shown is that the PA has been siphoning off almost $1 billion shekel, hundreds of millions of dollars every year, at least for the last 3 years, to what they call the PLO institutions.
Hirsch says there's plenty the West can do to hold the Palestinian Authority accountable. He also says transferring money to institutions belonging to the PLO should be prohibited. He says these are elementary requirements that should be implemented quickly.
Rewarding terrorism does not promote peace. Siphoning off billions of dollars in order for these PLO institutions to, again, directly or indirectly finance, fund, promote terrorism does not promote peace.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
After this, staring into the abyss, how astronomers were finally able to capture this image of a gentle giant.
And finally tonight, scientists are revealing the first, though fuzzy, image of what was until now unseeable.
That's right. It's called the Event Horizon, a global network of 8 synchronized radio telescopes around the world. Astronomers are using the network to bring the supermassive black hole at the center of our own Milky Way galaxy into the light.
This image shows a bright ring surrounding the darkness, the telltale sign of the shadow of the black hole. Light escaping from the hot gas swirling around the black hole appears to us as the bright ring.
And scientists believe nearly all galaxies, including our own, have these giant black holes at their center, where light and matter cannot escape, making it extremely difficult to take their picture. This is not the first picture, though, of a black hole. The same group released a snapshot of another in 2019 from a distant galaxy.
Wow, Jen, I was reading earlier that this project with the 8 cameras cost $60 million to produce that image.
Oh, wow. Wrap your mind around that.
Well, thank you so much for watching this edition of Faith Nation.
Have a great evening. We'll see you tomorrow.